Sarah Henderson smiled as she stirred sugar into her tea, the same way she did every morning, calm, composed, and perfectly practiced. What no one knew was that her husband, Mark Henderson, wouldn't live to see the end of the week. And by the time the truth came out, Sarah would be sitting in a prison cell, realizing with chilling clarity that she was never going home again. Sarah Henderson moved through life like a well-practiced actress. In the quiet town of Greenfield, she was admired by neighbors and respected in social circles. Her blonde hair always perfectly styled, her voice calm and pleasant, and her presence warm enough to disarm anyone who might look too closely. She volunteered at local shelters, hosted themed dinner parties, and smiled with a grace that never cracked. Most people believed she had it all: a beautiful home, a loving husband, a life many envied. But behind Sarah's carefully polished image was a woman who felt trapped, suffocated by the very perfection others admired. Mark Henderson was everything Sarah no longer wanted: steady, predictable, kind to a fault. He worked 9 to 5 at an accounting firm and came home at the same hour every evening. He made dinner when Sarah didn't feel like it, rubbed her shoulders when she complained of headaches, and never once raised his voice. But instead of inspiring love, his quiet devotion irritated her. To Sarah, Mark had become furniture, useful, present, but uninteresting. She wanted excitement. She wanted control. And most of all, she wanted to start over, alone, but rich. Divorce, however, wasn't part of her plan. It meant questions, lawyers, and splitting everything. Mark had a family name that meant something in Greenfield. Sarah knew she'd walk away with less than she wanted. She didn't want a compromise. She wanted everything. So over time, her thoughts grew darker. She started reading stories about wives who got away with murder. Quiet, clever deaths, accidents, misfortune. She wasn't emotional about it. It felt logical, an answer to a problem. Mark had a life insurance policy. Not a huge one, but enough. She encouraged him to upgrade it, pretending to be concerned about what might happen someday. He didn't suspect a thing. He trusted her completely. Sarah began preparing. Slowly, carefully. She watched what he ate, refilled his medicine bottles herself, and paid attention to every detail. No one would believe sweet Sarah could hurt anyone. That was the power she held. To the outside world, everything stayed the same. She still attended charity events, still walked hand in hand with Mark at the Sunday market, still baked cookies for the neighborhood kids. But her mind was elsewhere. Every morning she woke up beside him. She imagined what life would be like without him. Quiet, peaceful, free. She saw herself walking into a luxury hotel suite alone. No more small-town gossip or routine dinners. Just freedom. Sarah kept her secrets well. She deleted browsing history, used cash for anything suspicious, and never confided in anyone, not even her lover. Because yes, she had one. A younger man from a nearby town who had no idea what she was capable of. She told him little, just that her marriage was ending soon and that she wanted to travel. He believed her. Everyone always did. But Sarah wasn't waiting for a clean break. She was preparing for a clean escape. And in her mind, it was only a matter of time before everything fell perfectly into place. It was raining the night Mark Henderson died. The streets of Greenfield were slick and empty, the kind of night when most people stayed indoors. But Mark had gone out for groceries. Sarah had asked him to pick up something she claimed she needed for dinner, a simple errand. Something he had done 100 times before. But this time, he never came home. His car was found early the next morning, wrapped around a tree just off Mill Creek Road. The front end was crushed. Paramedics found him in the driver's seat, already gone. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma. The police report noted the weather, the curve of the road, and the wet asphalt. Everything pointed to a tragic accident. Sarah received the news with a performance worthy of applause. She collapsed when the officers delivered the news. She sobbed at the hospital. She clutched Mark's wedding band when they handed it to her. Friends rallied around her, bringing casseroles and flowers. She gave heartfelt thanks to every single one. Her voice trembled just enough. Her tears came on cue. People whispered about how strong she was, how gracefully she handled the sudden loss. No one saw through it. Not yet. She moved quickly in the days that followed. The life insurance paperwork was submitted within a week. She claimed she couldn't pay the mortgage alone, that she was struggling emotionally and financially. The $1 million policy was her safety net, she said. What most didn't know was that Sarah had already started shopping for real estate in another state. She wanted a house near the coast, something modern with glass walls and an ocean view, somewhere far from Greenfield. The funeral was tasteful and small. Sarah wore black and stood alone near the casket. Her expression was somber but composed. People assumed she was still in shock. Her eyes stayed dry as others wept. She accepted condolences, nodded politely, and walked away from the grave without looking back. She wasn't mourning. She was planning. Every move had a purpose. She had memorized her lines, rehearsed her expressions, and played the role perfectly. Within weeks, Sarah began selling furniture, clearing out the house, and cutting ties. She told neighbors she needed a fresh start. She said the house was too full of memories. But her real goal was to leave no trace of her old life behind. She wanted to disappear into her new future without the weight of Greenfield or its memories. No one questioned her timing. No one asked why Mark had driven that road so far from the store. No one wondered why she hadn't gone with him, even though she usually did. The town accepted it for what it appeared to be, a heartbreaking loss in a quiet community. But behind her calm smile, Sarah felt invincible. She believed she had outsmarted everyone. She thought she had written the ending of her story with perfect precision. What she didn't know was that the real story hadn't ended. It was just beginning, and somewhere, someone was already pulling on a thread that would unravel everything. Tom Granger had seen enough suspicious deaths to know when something felt wrong. The veteran private investigator had worked insurance fraud cases for years, and when the Henderson claim landed on his desk, something about it stood out. It wasn't just the speed of the filing, it was the precision. Sarah had submitted every required document in record time, made follow-up calls almost daily, and included a copy of the autopsy report before it had even been requested. It wasn't typical widow behavior. Most people in grief moved slower, forgot things, needed reminders, but Sarah was too organized, too calm. That's when Tom decided to take a closer look. His first stop was Mark's old email. The insurance company had a release form signed before his death, giving them access. What Tom found was chilling. There were multiple emails to himself, drafts with time-stamped entries, notes he had written but never sent. In them, Mark described feeling tired and sick for months. He wrote about odd flavors in his food, dizziness after meals, and strange medications Sarah gave him. One entry simply read, "She says I'm just stressed. I think she's lying." Another said, "If anything happens to me, someone needs to look at Sarah." Mark had clearly been afraid. But the real turning point came when Tom found a folder titled, "In Case Something Happens." Inside were screenshots, text logs, even photos of pill bottles. Mark had grown suspicious enough to document what he believed might be happening. He had no concrete proof of poison, but his fear was real and persistent. He had even scheduled an appointment with a toxicologist 2 weeks before his death. He never made it. Tom drove to Greenfield to retrace Mark's final movements. The crash site offered little at first glance. The police had already ruled it accidental. But the mechanic who towed the vehicle remembered something odd. The brakes seemed completely unresponsive. He'd chalked it up to the impact, but Tom wanted to be sure. He had the car brought to a private garage for inspection. What they found wasn't from the crash. It had been tampered with. The brake fluid line had been punctured, just enough to cause failure under pressure. Then came the most important discovery. Mark's car had a second dash cam, one Sarah didn't know about. It was hidden near the back window, disguised as a sensor. The footage from that night was blurry, but revealing. Around 10:45 p.m., a figure approached the car. The face wasn't visible, but the shape, the posture, even the long coat with a torn hem matched Sarah's. The figure crouched near the driver's side for several minutes before disappearing into the darkness. Tom sent everything to the insurance company and forwarded it to the local authorities. This wasn't just a suspicious claim anymore. It was evidence of something far more sinister. Sarah had crafted a flawless cover story, but she didn't know that Mark had already begun his own investigation long before she ever thought of ending his life. And now, piece by piece, the truth was rising from the shadows. Sarah was packing when they came to her door. She had just zipped the last suitcase, filled with designer clothes and newly bought passports. Her flight to Spain was booked for the next morning, first class. She planned to disappear into the warmth of another country, far from Greenfield, far from the grave, far from the consequences. She believed the worst was behind her. The insurance payout was being processed, and no one had raised any alarms. At least not in front of her. What she didn't know was that the world she had built so carefully was already beginning to collapse. The investigators had spent the past week quietly gathering evidence. Tom Granger's findings had been handed over to the district attorney's office. The dashcam footage had been enhanced and verified. Even though Sarah's face was never shown, the coat, one she had been photographed wearing just days earlier, was enough to place her at the scene. The mechanic confirmed the brake line tampering, and an expert in vehicle forensics signed off on the conclusion it had been an intentional act. The final blow came from Sarah's own computer. After obtaining a warrant, police recovered emails sent from her private account to a man named Lucas Fields. Lucas was a bartender in a nearby town, someone Sarah had met during one of her solo weekend escapes. Their messages were laced with code words and vague promises, but one line stood out. "It will all be behind us soon. He's not going to be in the way anymore." That single sentence became the smoking gun. Lucas, when questioned, admitted to the affair. He denied knowing anything about the murder, and investigators believed him. Sarah had kept him in the dark, too. She always had control. The arrest was quiet. No handcuffs on the lawn, no neighbors watching. They waited until she was alone, sitting in her kitchen with a glass of wine. She didn't resist. She didn't even speak. But her silence said more than words could. She looked stunned, not because she was caught, but because she truly believed she had fooled everyone. She had miscalculated one thing: Mark's instinct. She had never considered that he might have seen through her, that he might have left a trail behind. The trial was fast. The prosecutors had a timeline, motive, digital evidence, and forensic proof. Sarah sat through it all with a hollow expression, like a ghost watching someone else's story unfold. The courtroom heard about her search history, the life insurance, changes, and her steps leading up to Mark's death. No emotion crossed her face until the sentence was read. Life in prison, no parole. When she stood to be taken away, she glanced back once, just for a moment. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't regret, it was disbelief. For the first time, Sarah Henderson understood she hadn't been the author of her own ending. She was no longer in control. She wouldn't be boarding a plane. She wouldn't be sipping wine by the sea. She had traded her freedom for a fantasy. And now, she would never leave the prison walls again. The prison was nothing like the life Sarah Henderson had imagined for herself. Gone were the silk sheets and scented candles, the spotless kitchen, the glass of Chardonnay at sunset. In their place were cold concrete walls, a thin mattress, and the endless sound of clanging doors. Time moved differently behind bars. Days bled into one another, measured not by events, but by routine. Morning counts, tasteless meals, and long stretches of silence. Sarah, once the envy of her suburban neighborhood, had become inmate 36492. A number, not a name. A cautionary tale, not a success story. At first, she held on to the idea that this was temporary, that some mistake had been made. She convinced herself that an appeal would overturn everything, that her lawyers would find some crack in the case. But weeks passed, and nothing changed. No new evidence surfaced. No technicalities saved her. The world outside kept moving, and she remained frozen in place. Even the media had moved on. Her face had been on every screen for a week. The evil wife of Greenfield. But the attention faded quickly. New stories took her place. Her name disappeared from the headlines, just as her freedom had vanished from her future. She tried to blend in, but it was impossible. Other inmates had heard about her case. Some admired her cold calculation. Others resented it. To them, she was the woman who thought she was smarter than everyone else. The woman who thought she could plan a murder like a vacation and walk away untouched. She kept to herself, rarely spoke, and spent her days in the library or pacing the yard. The isolation gnawed at her, but she never let it show. She had built her entire life around appearances, and even now, with everything gone, pride was the only thing she refused to surrender. Occasionally, letters arrived, a few from curious strangers, fascinated by her crime. One from her sister, short, cold, and final. No visits, no calls. She was alone. Mark's family never wrote. They had already begun reclaiming his memory, painting him not as a victim of an accident, but a man who saw the danger too late. His name was now tied to awareness campaigns about domestic murder. His death had sparked conversations, not sorrow. He had left behind more than just a warning. He had left a legacy of caution. Sarah thought often about the moment she realized she had failed, that final day in her kitchen when the knock came at the door. She had been so sure of herself, so certain that her new life was waiting just beyond the airport terminal. But instead of boarding a plane, she had boarded a van with barred windows. Her story didn't end with freedom. It ended with a prison ID, a cell number, and the growing realization that nothing was coming to save her. There was no escape now, no charm to fix what had been done, no smile to undo the damage. Sarah Henderson, once so confident in her plan, finally understood the weight of her choices. She would never walk down a suburban sidewalk again. She would never see the inside of her dream home. She would never go home. not in this lifetime.